Welcome to Maritime Matters, a podcast focused on leaders in the maritime market, the people, the companies, the technologies that are making and breaking the news, helping to lead the maritime industry to a safer, more efficient, more profitable, and cleaner future. Welcome aboard.
Welcome to Maritime Matters, the MarineLink Podcast. I'm Eric Haun, editor of Marine News Magazine and MarineLink.com, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Today we'll do a deep dive into a topic that is of crucial importance not only to the commercial maritime industry, but to the nation as a whole: inland waterways infrastructure, and more specifically, the ongoing Chickamauga Lock Project on the Tennessee River. I'm pleased to be joined by several experts in this field, including Tracy Zea, President and CEO of the Waterways Council, Incorporated, an organization that advocates for a modern national system of ports and inland waterways, as well as Elizabeth Burks, Chief of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Nashville Division, and Captain Joe Cotton, the Corps' project manager for the Chickamauga Lock Project. Tracy, Elizabeth, and Joe, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Tracy, I'd like to start with you to sort of set the scene, to get an overview of America's inland waterways infrastructure. Our listeners in the towboat and barge sector will obviously have a solid understanding, but for those in other parts of the maritime industry who maybe are not aware, will you please describe the role of locks and dams for the navigation on U.S. River systems and touch on the general condition of this network and need for improvement?
Absolutely. First off, there's 12,000 navigable miles of inland waterways. There's 236 locks chambers at 196 facilities. That is partially constructed by a fuel tax paid by the industry of 29 cents a gallon. If you look at our locks in the facilities, it's not a secret that they're old. The majority of them were built back in the 1920s and 30s. 80% of all of our locks right now are past their 50-year design life. Right now, the average age of a lock is just under 60 years old. So every year that the lock is past its 50-year design life, the risk of failure goes up exponentially. Luckily, with us here today, you have two very capable people that are doing a great job at not only modernizing the system, but maintaining it, which is a critical aspect of this system. The American inland waterways is giving us a true advantage over foreign competition, especially in the agriculture space. You can get fertilizer going upriver, but you can also have, the export crops leaving to go to China, competing against Brazil. When I was on Capitol Hill, USDA still does till this day. They do the cost from a farmer in Iowa in the field going to China versus a farmer in Brazil going to China. And the reason that China was buying American soybeans was because of the cheap rate of inland waterway transportation. The problem is in China, if you look, or in Brazil, the Belt and Road Initiative that was done by China, the gap's closing right now. You don't see trucks stuck on the side of the roads with crops. Ports are getting modernized. So the need to update this system is getting more critical if we as Americans want to keep our competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I think the critical importance of the system cannot be overstated, especially given what you just mentioned about progress in other parts of the world. So it's key that we maintain our advantage there, and obviously the Corps has a key role in doing that. And Elizabeth, if you don't mind, again, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you sort of explain how the Army Corps, how they design, build, operate, and maintain inland waterways infrastructure such as locks and dams?
Absolutely. So the Corps in general is responsible for the inland waterway system. Whether it's the open flow rivers or some that need to be controlled, like the Tennessee River and its watershed, they operate and maintain those for navigation. Navigation is one of our primary stakeholders. We've got this navigation mission for the enterprise. In terms of operating and maintaining, We're responsible for the infrastructure. So again, back to locks and dams. In terms of what the Corps does for inland nav, it's such a large, broad system, and maintaining the budgets to keep all that infrastructure going is really important. There's so much critical infrastructure there, and Tracy talked about the age of that infrastructure, built in the 20s, 30s, 40s. So it becomes more and more expensive to maintain. So as a nation, we've made a critical investment to go ahead and bring new systems online. So that's of utmost importance. So now we have to figure out exactly what the priority is and how to fund that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And Joe, obviously we're here today to talk about the Chickamauga project. Will you please give a brief history of the Chickamauga Lock and Dam and its significance to the region? What is the age and condition of the infrastructure, and what prompted the need for upgrade?
Absolutely. So Chickamauga Lock has a very rich history. It is a major civil works project of national importance. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was there when it was commissioned in 1940, but it has a huge significance to the people of the Tennessee Valley and specifically Chattanooga. So the first original investigations into the Chickamauga site were conducted in 1932, back when Nashville District was the Chattanooga District. So 1933, the TVA Act was put into place. Many employees from Chattanooga District were the founders of the Tennessee Valley Authority. Other folks came up to Nashville, our current footprint right now. 1936, part of the New Deal, part of the TVA Act, work started on the Chickamauga Lock and Dam, a 60-foot by 360-foot lock chamber. Now, back at that time, barges were only 28 foot wide. That was the industry standard. You could send 4 barges through that 60 by 360 chamber. Today, we've just to increase our overall efficiency, we're now using jumbo barges, 35 foot by 195 foot. So we're only able to pass 1 barge through at a time. So if you're talking about the 15 barge tows that you see on the Ohio, the Upper Mississippi, even lower Tennessee, that's 15 hours that the mariners are out there cutting barges just to get through, or cutting tows to just make it through our lock. With our new 110 by 600 foot chamber, we'll be able to pass 9 at a time. Just 1 cut, much safer work environment for the mariners, much quicker to access the upper reaches of the Tennessee River and ultimately the city of Knoxville, Oak Ridge, and other facilities up there. Now, the reason why is Chickamauga Lock replacing its lock chamber is due to alkali aggregate reaction. Essentially, the stone that was used in the concrete mix back in the late 30s, early 40s, the chemical reaction creates a gel-like substance around each of the stones, the billions of stones that make up the Chickamauga Dam. It wasn't something that we really knew about back then. TVA identified these issues back in the early 40s and has been, with the Corps' help, conducting aggressive maintenance all across the dam, not just the lock. So ultimately, that is the driver behind this project. It's the fact that there are structural issues with the Chickamauga Dam, structural issues that have been mitigated through maintenance both by TVA across the dam and then the Corps, ultimately investing about $30 million in the early 2000s to keep the lock in working order. We've reached the point where we're at diminishing returns for that maintenance work, that aggressive maintenance work, beyond what we normally conduct for our locks. So a replacement is in order.
Okay, and Joe, you mentioned the relationship with TVA, and Elizabeth, I'm wondering if maybe you can comment on that a little bit. Is the situation a little bit unique on the Tennessee River compared to other parts of the country where you have TVA, I believe, owns the lock and the Corps is in charge of operating and maintaining? Is that the case?
So on the Tennessee River, the TVA has authority for recreation, hydropower, and the Corps has responsibility for navigation. So TVA is responsible for flood control, flood risk management on the Tennessee River. So it is a joint use, if you will, or a joint partnership with TVA where we operate and maintain the river to the highest standards. So with the Corps, in terms of navigation responsibility, we're responsible for the O&M for the locks. So it's a great partnership. We put forward a memorandum of agreement in the 1960s. It's a two-page document, a fantastic partnership with them. There are not many two-page documents from the 60s that have continued forward, but it's just a testament to the partnership and the cooperation of both organizations to continue to operate, again, under this two-page memorandum to keep the river flowing and all these authorizations moving forward for the people in this Tennessee Valley.
Okay, great. And Joe, you mentioned obviously the Lock Project, which we're here to talk about, and that kicked off, I believe, was it 2003?
Yes, 2003 is when we were first authorized. Folks envisioned a 110-foot wide lock at Chickamauga, really at the dam's completion. Just a fun fact: when there's a highway bridge that has been built over the Chickamauga Dam that was built in 1955, and the way that the bridge piers are all spaced. They're spaced 3 spillway bays across, with one exception, which is where the current lock is. So we're going to be able to remove 4 spillway bays without actually impacting the bridge above us. So this has been a project a long time coming. A lot of folks have had this in mind. Our first authorization was in 2003. A lot of prep work, building a cofferdam, excavation of material, but really we started placing concrete in 2018 when our lock chamber contract was awarded.
Okay, and can you maybe outline some of the key milestones in the scope of the project and progress that has been made to date, and discuss the current status, where we are today, and what are the next steps going forward towards anticipated completion?
Absolutely. So most of our prep work was conducted around the 2010 timeframe. That was ordering long lead items such as the miter gates, culvert valves, approach wall beams, large components that we actually have stored at TVA sites across the valley, Watts Bar and Muscle Shoals. As far as prep work, building that site where the contractors can work, that was completed in the early 2010s. Building a coffer dam structure. So this what makes a Chickamauga Lock replacement unique is, one, it's a replacement. We're actually going to decommission the existing lock due to those structural issues I mentioned. But it's also riverside of the existing lock chamber. So we essentially created our own island in the middle of the river, downstream of the existing dam. So everything that the contractor is using has to be barged in and then ultimately craned into the workspace. So something that separates us quite a bit from other projects across the system, including Kentucky Lock, another project that Nashville District is working on. 2017 was the award of the lock chamber contract. That is our big contract, building the concrete monoliths that ultimately form the lock chamber. It's over 250,000 cubic yards, so enough concrete to build a 2-lane road from Chattanooga to Nashville. Big effort, thousands and thousands of cubic yards of concrete being placed every single month. In 2021, we were able to award the upstream approach wall contract, essentially building that upstream funnel that will allow barges to safely navigate into the new lock chamber and also be protected from any flows that would be caused by the spillway across the Chickamauga Dam. Both of those contracts are in place right now. The contractors are progressing. We're expecting the upstream approach walls to be completed next summer, and then all the lock chamber work to be completed in the summer of 2026. A huge milestone that's about to come up, the upstream miter gates are being brought to site in November of this year. Total of 14 pieces to build the upstream and downstream miter gates. They're 150,000 pounds each of these 14 pieces. So imagine craning in a M1 Abrams main battle tank, sliding it into place, and then ultimately having to weld all 14 of these sections together to make the gates. It's going to be a huge effort by our contractor, but a lot of the groundwork has already been laid, and we're excited to see that progress being made. Finally, to close out this project, we're in the process of awarding the approach wall and decommissioning contract. It's in the solicitation phase right now. I've seen the proposals. I can't really share any details just to keep that process fair and avoid any bias or influence by other folks. But we've seen the proposals. We're working through negotiations with what we have, and as we have updates, we'll be sure to share with other folks. We're expecting the lock to be operational at the end of 2027. And project to be completely wrapped up at the end of 2029, assuming we have award here in the next few months.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tracy.
I think what Joe just said's important. A lot of time we judge a construction phase from the time of authorization, which was 2023, to the time it becomes operational, which is 2027. So if you look at that, that'd be 24 years. But that's not fair. We had a project on the Ohio River called Homestead that sucked up all the funding pretty much from 2003 till 2014. And project funding for other project funding didn't really come available till 2014. So if you really look, Joe said they started pouring in 2018 and it's going to become operational in 2027. So that's 9 years of construction. That is similar to the length that these locks were built back in the 1920s and 30s. It was a 6 to 9 year average. If you do it from the authorization, it's 24. That sounds very, very bad, but there's factors out there that contributed, and it's a 9 year period. So as we move forward with this backlog of portfolio of projects that we have, it's roughly about 17 right now for the whole system. We're hoping and we're working with the Corps that, 9 or less is the new norm. Once these projects are started. So the Nashville district with Chickamauga, once they began working, did execute. And that's something I think, we should be proud of, that once they received their money, it got done.
If I could ask Elizabeth a question, we have a new structure here in Nashville district, the Integrated Project Office, ultimately two major projects. How does that fit into the greater system? Where do you see these projects closing out, and how do you see that impacting the greater navigation system as far as funding goes?
Yeah, so we did with two mega projects in the footprints for the Nashville district. Decisions were made to pull these two mega projects out, the Kentucky Lock and Chickamauga Lock projects, so the team can really focus their efforts on delivering these projects. So they've been set aside from the typical portfolio that the district is executing on an annual basis, pulling those aside and really operating at a different level, a different speed, a different pace, because we're all about trying to deliver these projects for the nation. With the support of Waterways Council and other advocates, and obviously congressional members, we've been able to receive supplemental funds that really gives us the boost in funding that we have to execute these projects faster than ever. So in terms of what we talked about earlier, incremental funding is really an inefficient way to build a project. You would never build a house one paycheck at a time. It just wouldn't be efficient, right? So with the ability to get this large influx of funds through supplemental, we can focus our efforts and get these construction projects built faster and into the system. And then it goes back to what Tracy was talking about. The inland waterways really set us aside from other countries and make us global competitors. So the more that we're able to execute and build these locks, get them online faster, the more we continue to be, have an economic advantage for the U.S.
Other thing with the inland waterways, I think, it's out of sight, out of mind all the time. The general regular American probably doesn't know what a barge or a towboat is. You don't sit behind it at a railroad stop. You're not in rush hour traffic with it. But the unique thing about the inland waterways from a capacity standpoint, it is one of the very, very few modes that we can add additional tonnage. We can take a lot more tonnage on the inland waterways. And why is that important? You look at where we are right now with the very conscious CO2 emission, climate focused and improving our climate. Well, barge transportation is the cleanest mode of surface transportation. You can take tonnage off the highways. You can reduce congestion. You can reduce emissions, and it's all right here, readily available in our nation. I think Nashville is the best example of how barge traffic can supplement tonnage. Nashville used to receive less than 1% of all their gasoline via barge. It used to come all pipelines. If you've been to Nashville, you realize there's been an explosive growth over the last 20 years, and there's a population boom. And now about 40% of all gasoline comes by barge. So that is a way where you can add additional tonnage take trucks off the road and supplement the need for regular Americans.
We're already seeing increases at Chickamauga Lock. When we did our economic analysis for this project, we assumed that there'd be no increase in traffic. 1,000,000 tons a year is what Chick has traditionally done. There was a dip, of course, during the pandemic, with a lot of uncertainty in the supply chain. Last year, we hit 1.3 million tons. We're well on track for 1.5 million. And this is all before the new lock is operational. This is with a construction site immediately next to the existing lock chamber. We're already seeing a 50% increase in barge traffic. And we're not even operating the new lock. So it's not if you build it, they'll come. They're already here. We're ready for that increased traffic. Chickamauga Lock is the bottleneck on the Tennessee River. Everything downstream of Chickamauga Lock is a 110 by 600 foot lock, capable of passing up to 9 barges at a time.
Yeah, this is an open question for any of you who'd like to answer, but can you discuss more how the project's completion at Chickamauga will, help that local economy, help that increase in navigational traffic? What are the efficiency gains that we'll see for the commercial operators?
The difference between 1 barge and 9 barges cannot be overstated. A lot of the tows that we see coming through Chick Lock, typically 4 to 8 barges. If you call ahead to the lockmaster, we're getting you through in 45 minutes instead of 8, 9 hours. Being able to quickly go from the various switch yards that are downstream of Chick Lock and on their way up to Knoxville. Just upstream of Chickamauga Lock, TVA has a couple facilities, Sequoia and Watts Bar, 2 nuclear power plants that provide power for 1 million folks. Transformers, generators, turbines, as they come to those sites for regular maintenance and replacement, there's no way to move that by road. There's no way to move that by train. Barge is the only efficient way to move those pieces of equipment as a single piece to site and ultimately have them installed. It is possible to disassemble a turbine. It's possible to disassemble a generator, box it up from the manufacturing facility and install it. I personally think it's much more efficient to build in a factory controlled setting with all of your testing equipment there than to build something of that significance on site. We have several chemical producers upstream of Chickamauga Lock. About half of all the laundry detergent really comes from one of the plants that's just upstream of us. So it's something that impacts everyone in their everyday lives. Being able to efficiently move salt, the primary material that is being transported through the Chick Lock, to those producers. If you go even farther upstream, Department of Energy at Oak Ridge, significant amount of work going on there. I can't really go into the details of what they're sending through the lock. Unfortunately, I don't know those details myself. But when large equipment is needed by Department of Energy, the only way to move that is through the Chickamauga Lock and the locks farther upstream. Ultimately, we're supporting the national defense by the work that's going on at Oak Ridge and the Department of Energy. And really, we're just giving the city of Knoxville more options. How do they move salt to keep their roads maintained? How are they moving asphalt materials to produce asphalt to keep the roads maintained as well? Things like that. It can go by other means of transportation, but it's just much, much more efficient going through the barge, using barges.
And Eric, if I can double down on that a little bit, 1 barge through the current lock versus 9 barges through the new lock, that's an 80% efficiency. So I think our commercial users are going to find more interest in pushing upriver. So that's significant. And we're already seeing that confidence in the system. But when you have that ability to transport goods and services further upriver, you're going to invite more industry up there. More industry, more people, better economies. Just the commerce of scale is going to improve. So it's not only Chickamauga Lock, but it's that larger system that we have to look at. And so we're excited to be part of that.
Tracy, if I could ask you a question.
On the larger economies of scale, the National Waterways Foundation did an unscheduled lock outage study in where was most impacted. And everyone looks at a lock facilities like Chick and Chattanooga, and they think that is the area that is most affected by that lock facility. It's actually not true. So one of the locks we looked at was LaGrange in Illinois, on the Illinois River. The top state impacted by that lock was Texas. You would never think all the way up in Illinois that lock facility had a large impact on Texas, but that was where the largest impact was.
And Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's the Tennessee Valley, or the Tennessee River watershed. It may or may not include the Cumberland watershed, but it's a $19 billion economic impact. So, Chickamauga is just one piece of that puzzle. When you look at the larger system, it's a significant impact to the whole, southwest side of the country, southeast side of the country.
Tracy, if I could ask you a question. The Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation Marine Highway program is possibly expanding in the next couple of years. I know there's been studies looking at the Cumberland, looking at the Tennessee River. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Not an expert in that one.
Let's cut this part.
But on that, from the Marine Highway side, it's a grant program which is helpful for our shoreside facilities. If you look at all these terminals, they need to modernize and maintain just as much as our locks and dams facilities. So the more grants that can come in for businesses to stay on the river and stay open and create jobs, the better off that we will be.
Right now, the Cumberland and Upper Tennessee rivers are not part of that grant program. There's talks of it expanding in the next couple of years. So we're looking forward to working with the Department of Transportation should that come to pass and kind of taking a whole government approach. Should the system be expanded past where we're currently working.
Okay, and I also want to ask about non-commercial users at the Chickamauga. I understand it's quite a popular spot for boating and other activities. Can you discuss sort of the benefits that would be gained by those users from this project?
Absolutely. So the Chickamauga Lock is the second busiest lock in the country in terms of recreational traffic. Number one being Chicago Lock, giving you access to Lake Michigan. We see about 3,500 recreational vessels passing through the lock each year. When you do the math, you have more folks out in the summer, more folks out on weekends. We can see 30 or 40 vessels on a given day, just pleasure craft going up and downstream from Chick. You have events like Riverfest in Chattanooga. You could talk to our lock master, Paul Weaver, and he'll tell you stories of being out there until 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, passing vessels through because there's hundreds and hundreds of recreational craft going through the lock. Of course, you have the Volunteer Navy going up to Neyland Stadium in Knoxville from Chattanooga. A huge event for every home football game. Robert Neyland just happened to be our commander when we were in the Chattanooga district in 1932, and Chickamauga Lock was actually selected as a site. So there's a lot of history. Again, a lot of history with Chickamauga Lock, how we're tied to the local area, and I don't think it'll be much of a change as far as being able to pass through the lock any faster. But for those major events, being able to send 30, 40, 50 vessels through as opposed to the 20 or 30 will have an impact on the local economy and also just being a more reliable lock. That's really what it is. Being able to confidently go out and pass through the lock on any given day, knowing that it will be operational since we have a new lock there as opposed to the over 80-year-old facility right now.
And Elizabeth, you touched on this briefly earlier, but can you discuss how this project fits into the larger scope of infrastructure improvements along the Tennessee River? And how is this project influencing future infrastructure projects in the region?
Sure. So yes, Chickamauga is one of two mega projects that we have on the Tennessee River. The first is Kentucky, right at the mouth of the Ohio River. There we're actually adding a lock, and that's due to the volume that passes through the Kentucky lock. And then as we move our way upriver to about river mile 471, Tennessee River mile 471, we get to Chickamauga. And right now that's a bottleneck. Everything upriver can pass, everything downriver can pass 9 barges. And when you get to Chickamauga, you've got to limit your barge to one through the lock at a time. So by replacing this lock, again, you've got the 80% efficiency. So now, again, you can pass 9 barges. So more commerce through the lock. But that's not why we're replacing the lock at Chickamauga. It's really a safety concern. Going back to what Joe said earlier with the growing concrete, we had significant structural concerns for the lock. And so here it's a matter of safety. We'll go ahead and replace that lock. And while we're doing that, again, add the additional capacity so we can increase volume going through the lock. So in terms of infrastructure, it brings more confidence to those that want to use the Tennessee River and transports goods and services. And because we're getting the influx of funds to execute these, I think we've got more confidence in the system, confidence from Congress that we can complete these and execute to get the infrastructure turned back around to the stakeholders that are going to use it faster.
Yeah, and Tracy, are you seeing examples of lesson learned from this project? Obviously, there's been huge engineering challenges. You mentioned earlier the budgeting challenges that have been involved. Do you see lessons learned from this project being applied elsewhere?
I think from a lessons learned standpoint from a industry side is we need to continue to advocate with one voice and get funding from Congress so that the Corps can execute their job efficiently. There's together to develop what's called the capital investment strategy, which sets the ranking of construction projects. Now that these legacy projects such as Chick and Kentucky and Lower Mon and Olmsted are done, it's more important than ever that industry and the Corps stay together and follow the capital investment strategy to continue to modernize the system, because when we have followed it and we have received successful funding for the last 11 years from Congress, projects are getting done and projects are getting completed, and the nation is realizing, the benefit cost ratio of the returns and the economic values of these projects, because, each one of these projects do provide economic benefit to the nation. So our biggest lesson learned is continue to get money. Hopefully Congress can do it by the end of December, I think is the new normal, so that the Corps can efficiently do their job and complete these projects.
Yeah. In other words, modernization is happening now more efficiently thanks to this model. But are you also seeing increased funding available today? And if so,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, so I think the greatest example of increased funding is fiscal year 25. Both the House and Senate draft bill are at $10 billion for the Corps of Engineers. You go back to fiscal year 10, it was below $5 billion total for the Corps. So in 14 years, they have more than doubled the funding for the Corps of Engineers, recognizing that this infrastructure is outdated. We wish we were at 10 billion the last 14 years, but beggars can't be choosers. And, this funding is continued to increase. The last 8 years has been record level funding for the Corps of Engineers. And we hope that Congress continues to plus that up, because if you look at all of our lock facilities, we only have 17 right now that are getting modernized. You still have 180 facilities that need to be upgraded. So the more money, the better, and we need to keep modernizing this system.
The Corps' responsibility in that is to be good stewards of public dollars, making sure that we're efficiently packaging contracts to get these projects closed out, being very aggressive in our quality assurance, making sure that we are building products to last. We don't want to have a new lock with the same alkali aggregate reaction concerns that the old lock had. So we're back in this situation 80 years from now. Nashville's IPO is here to close 2 of these major projects. Getting Kentucky off the books, getting Chick off the books will allow leadership to ultimately allocate funds in greater quantities to other projects that are already underway. If we get Chick in Kentucky off the books, that's 2 less projects that full funding needs to be split with, and ultimately we can better focus our efforts across the Corps.
Yeah, I think Joe's point there at the end is important, that this isn't a regional, this isn't a district or division issue when it comes to the inland waterway transportation system. It's a holistic outlook across the whole Corps and for the whole nation that benefits everybody. So that's a very important point.
Thank you for listening to Maritime Matters. If you would like to be featured on a future Maritime Matters podcast, visit www.marinelink.com or email maritimematters@marinelink.com.